Welcome everyone to GEC's webinar on accelerating the transition to 100% sustainable technology. Exactly 1 month ago today, GEC hosted an event at Climate Week New York. We have taken highlights from the day and developed a webinar series. Today's webinar will feature the Innovations and Leaders panel. We hope you also join us on November 20th for a recap of the supply, demand, and roadmap discussion, and on December 3rd, where we have a sneak peek at GEC's upcoming updated criteria. For our webinar format, we'll share two pre-recorded videos of the event featuring two speakers each, and then Bob Mitchell, GEC CEO, and I, Director of Partnerships, will have a brief discussion to dive deeper. Welcome so much, Bob.
Great. Thanks for having me here, Sheila. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Before we begin, Bob and I would like to briefly share a bit about GEC. The Global Electronics Council is a mission-driven nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the market for sustainable electronics. We were founded in 2006 and manage the globally recognized Type 1 eco-label EPEAT. GEC has staff in the US, Canada, Belgium, and the Netherlands. EPEAT is an electronics eco-label with over 4,000 products in the EPEAT registry, sold in 46 countries with over 50 participating manufacturers. Last year, we also launched EPEAT Climate Plus, representing products that meet the highest EPEAT climate criteria. Lastly, GEC provides thought leadership through advocacy, our State of Sustainability Impact Reports, purchaser guidance, case studies, webinars like these, and trainings. I'd like to now hand it over to Bob to introduce an exciting initiative we launched at Climate Week.
Great. Thanks, Sheila. We could go to the next slide. As a impartial international independent nonprofit, it's our mission really to work with stakeholders from around the world and within our community to accelerate the transition to sustainable technology. During Climate Week, we launched what we would coin as a ambition for our global community of stakeholders, from those that manufacture and brand electronic products, all the way through those that purchase it, invest in those companies, create policies that may affect them, or are involved in other ways such as academia or civil society, as a few more examples. Consistent with our vision and mission around a world with only sustainable technology, and trying to align with the goal setting process across a variety of different material areas, we've set this aspiration for collective action to reach 100% sustainable electronics by 2050 for everyone, everywhere. We do believe this is achievable, but first it needs to be defined. And if we move to the next slide, we can talk through exactly what that means. So what does that mean for us? First, net zero emissions across all the, we're talking not only the product supply chains, but also related to electronic services as well. And when we talk about electronics, we talk about all electronic technology. For example, not only does the work we do cover traditional electronics, but also renewable technology as well. And so we are looking at a total envelope of net zero emissions here by 2050. Water neutrality, zero waste, and effective environmental and human rights due diligence. So what does that last one mean? So there is an expectation now, for instance, in the European Union, that companies have effective environmental and human rights due diligence. However, we look at this in a similar way, that it's important now to have it. That's part of reaching net zero emissions, water neutrality, and zero waste. But once you get there, you have to be able to maintain it. Due diligence is iterative. You are working your way throughout your operations, your supply chain, as well as how your products are used in the world, and how they're treated at end of life, hopefully with a circular pattern. Effective environmental and human rights due diligence allows you not only to get there in an iterative fashion, but to maintain it over time. Next
Great.
slide,
Thank
please.
you so much, Bob. Yeah, super exciting initiative to have launched at Climate Week. Before we actually show the videos of the highlights of our event footage, how about you briefly say a few words about your just overall impressions of GEC's Climate Week event?
Well, I'll say it was exciting, electric. You can't say much less about an event like that. And really, it's not just one event, right? It's a collection of events. People coming in from around the world to share their brightest, thoughts and ideas, contribute their time, and work towards, solutions for this urgent crisis that the globe is facing.
Hmm.
And so it was pretty amazing to see the ambition, but also the energy that came to New York City during that time. It's always a vibrant city, of course, but to have that many people come in for a specific topic, and the fact that it was in parallel with the UN GA, the UN Global Assembly or General Assembly, which has a focus on material topics such as water and others. And so it's a priority for, I mean, what we're talking about today, and part of our aspiration is a priority for international bodies such as the UN. So we were, speaking about this event specifically for GEC at the Nest, we were very excited. One, the level of enthusiasm and great information sharing we had from our panelists, but also the attendees. So
Hmm.
I'd say it's one of our, from a face-to-face perspective, it's one of the largest turnouts we've ever had. And so that's a reflection, I think, of the week itself, right? The center of gravity that Climate Week
Hmm.
is, but also the urgency that the community of stakeholders we work with sees in this topic specifically on climate, but broader on sustainability and driving towards our global aspiration.
That's great. I think that's just helpful to set the stage for the videos that we'll be sharing. So, next slide. I think this is a good segue into our first video. We'll be hearing from keynote and panelist Dr. Michael Dorsey, Director and Chair of the Walden Sustainability Solution Services at Arizona State University, and Bruno Sarda, EY's America's Leaders for Climate Change and Sustainability, and they'll be speaking to their advice on advancing sustainability within the industry. Let's look at the video.
One part of it is getting to that, sustainable, 100% sustainable electronics by 2050. But really, I think the bigger one, as I read in your material, is creating that world where only, and I'll emphasize it only because you put it there, where only sustainable technology is bought and sold. I think in order to deliver that at the scale of the planet, we've got to do at least three things that we do at the Sustainability Solutions Service. We've got to rethink and retool how we educate ourselves and how we deliver education. In our case, broadly, defined education. But for you all, how you educate folks in your supply chain, how you educate your consumers. So the challenge then is, once we think about re-educating, retooling how we educate, how can we quickly scale sustainability solutions? That's what we're thinking about at the Walden Sustainability Solutions Service. And that means really for us getting beyond theory, getting well beyond theory and getting into producing things that are profitable, things that pencil. In the Sustainability Solutions Service, we really embrace a collective ideological model. That's a model where we bring together a myriad of stakeholders from across institutions, not just the public sector, but again, public sector, private sector, the public sector, peer knowledge providers, and so forth. And we really work together to design and scale those solutions to get out ahead of the sustainability crisis.
At the Sustainability Solutions Service, we don't just believe, we know that right now we're in a moment where things that are sustainable, those things are not just prudent, they're not just good things, but they're profitable, they pencil, and they are part of the bottom line for a great number of industries, not just today, but yesterday, and they're going to be increasingly part of the bottom line going forward. That's absolutely the case. Certainly for energy, right now we're in a world where clean, green, renewable energy, wind and solar in particular, it's actually cheaper than an old, dirty, what I like to call fossil foolishness of the 20th century and 19th century. That's not exactly the case for everything that's sustainable, but it's increasingly day by day that is the case. That's becoming the case, for example, in the storage space and energy storage. So what's clean and green? It's the stuff that it pencils. It helps that it is additive in other ways, but we really focus on that bottom line and really making the case and making the argument that this is the financially prudent thing to do. And that wasn't always the case, but it is increasingly now in many sectors, and that's where we put our attention.
I think some of what Dr. Dorsey was saying, really resonates. This concept of scaling. Scaling is important because of the outcomes we need to generate, but it's also the path for sure in tech and frankly almost any sector. Scaling is how you get the economies of scale. This is how you start moving the market and frankly shifting kind of from a supply-based to more of a demand-based type of approach. Something that I think is important in this conversation is also the tech enablement and kind of what does technology allow us to do so that when we can, for example, dematerialize or digitize things that have otherwise a big physical footprint, maybe you're, increasing the technology footprint of a particular process, but you're making it overall more sustainable. And so, when we work with companies at EY across every sector, there's not a single sector that's not highly reliant on technology, that is not in some form of rapid to very rapid tech disruption in their own space, including, the use of information technology to accelerate everything else. So, I think as Dr. Dorsey mentioned, you have to start with good design thinking, right? It's like, what are you trying to do? How will you do it? What will it look like when it's done? What will you measure to know if you're on the right track? Prioritize, right? I mean, especially in these kind of constrained fiscal environments, it's like, what are the things that are going to get kind of the, most payoff early? Again, kind of trying to get to early wins so you can scale what works and kind of that startup mentality, right? Of try a lot of things and fail fast. And then I think, you mentioned it also is always be ready to speak to the why, right? And, I used to say at Dell, my job was to make sustainability sustainable, meaning, if we couldn't make business sense of it, then it would never really kind of, get out of the gate. It would stay somewhere close to philanthropy, social good, or just kind of, skunk works kind of. It's like, but in order for it to really gain traction, you have to help make sense of it, not just for people, not just for the planet, but for the business. And when you do that, then I think there's no force more powerful to drive fast change at scale than business when, frankly, it sees self-interest in it along the way. So I'll.
So, yeah, some really great points made by Dr. Darcy and Bruno Sarda. So, Bob, um, Dr. Dorsey spoke about practical solutions and collective ideology. And I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into his presentation and share one of his slides, the one that we see here. And, in your experience, how important is it for organizations to convene, cultivate trust, co-design, and connect?
I think this is a great model here, and actually, it's a pretty good map of what's been successful in the past in different ways from a pre-competitive standpoint. So you think back to the earlier slides from this webinar where I announced GEC's ambition or aspiration for the global community. We talked about this really broad idea of let's all stop working in as individual companies or individual demand influencers, or when we do get together, it's on one material topic around,
Mhm.
supply chain human rights or circularity or climate. We need to look at this holistically. And the first way to do that is to convene. We all need to be able to get on the same page. We need to drop any form of territorialism from an organizational standpoint, or and companies viewing it as a pre-competitive um, uh, investment in the global community, as well as in their industry, to be able to take a look at how all these pieces click together. That's going to take cultivating trust, which he puts here as
Mm-hmm.
well, and then co-designing what the future looks like. So we cannot do this in isolation across material topics and as individual organizations. And that's when we begin connecting with the outside influencers, using systems thinking to begin to create that exponential change in the world. Right now, a lot of sustainable sustainable topics, I'll say, and especially when it comes to private sector, are viewed
Mm-hmm.
as competitive items, I'll
Mm-hmm.
say. And so who has the net zero goal that's has the widest scope, is the most credible, and has the closest date, right? Um, and those things end up having to shift around a lot. Now, one of the great things about this collective ideology is the trust building begins to say we can break down those competitive walls to say we don't need to
Mm-hmm.
compete on whether we're saving the planet or keeping forced labor out of our supply chains. We should do that as table stakes to get in, and then we can
Right.
use um, our traditional competitive components to actually go out into the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and also really important for the future. I think kind of brings up also I think important topic about the C-suite. And so next slide for our next topic. At the event you asked Bruno Sarda an interesting follow-up question that we didn't get a chance to see in the video, and it was about like the interest and trends the industry is seeing in their C-suite. Can you share a little bit more about his response? I think that's also important.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, sustainability efforts within companies has been very grassroots, right? It's been had to sort of fight your way up through the chain because it was a passion project or it was a regulatory compliance item, to influence the C-suite. But now there are enough external influences when it comes to impact investing, global regulation, and in some cases, C-suites, CEOs or EVPs that are actually beginning to see the potential, um, uh, both moral and business benefit to acting as a
Hmm.
responsible company out there in the world. And so now, as it begins to get into deeper and deeper into board priorities, as well as the C-suite, that begins to change the focus, right? And I think we're going to hear again from our panelists here in a moment about some of the impacts of things like the regulatory structure and how that begins to influence how companies behave. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more from a recap of Bruno, Dr. Dorsey, Miranda, and Andres.
That's great. Yes, I think that leads us then to our second video. We'll be sharing highlights from Miranda Gardner, the Executive Director of iMason's Climate Accord, and Andres Ravenet, Microsoft's Director of Sustainability. And they'll speak to solutions being used to increase sustainability of data centers and the AI revolution.
I took the helm about a year ago. At that time, this was pre-generative AI. The numbers they were looking at for electricity use for the data center space, the digital infrastructure space, was around 2.4% of electricity. And for context, that is the same amount of electricity that Canada uses, that Germany uses, that Brazil uses, not combined, but individually. So when you're thinking about this industry, that's a big number just on electricity use. So we started really working with my governing body, and those are representatives from Google, AWS, Microsoft, and Meta, as well as Digital Realty and Schneider Electric. Hey, what can we do? What can we look at? And since then, they've issued 2 letters and calls to action for the industry. One on green concrete or low carbon concrete, Obviously, when you're building a data center, there's a lot of concrete involved, whether it's actually the pads or parking lots or any of the infrastructure around the building itself. And then the second one issued this year in July was a letter and call to action on EPDs, environmental product declarations. For those that don't know what that is, it's a third-party verified document that indicates to the market what the actual carbon footprint is of a material or a piece of equipment. It really can vary depending on the industry piece that you are in. It allows the companies to, one, look at it for purchasing, two, look at it for their own carbon footprint, but three, to really open up that lens of transparency. We are really trying to ensure that transparent collaborative action is coming from the Climate Accord itself. And in that vein, we have almost 300 companies involved. I see a few of my members and folks in the room, so I'm really happy to see you and joining us. The goal is for companies to act collectively and do the work together. We know you have your own individual targets, but that's only going to take us so far. Even with the companies that I listed and that you know, and even with their buying power, 8 trillion, I think, in market cap is the last estimate I saw on those numbers. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a very accelerated timeline that needs to happen, as we heard earlier this morning. This can't happen tomorrow with that kind of siloed impact.
We have this paradox a bit, this sustainability and AI paradox here of the increased usage of AI to the need for sustainable technology and meeting all these commitments. And we are very much tackling that head on, and we are doubling our commitments and investments into this. We've got new AI data centers being built as we speak today to accommodate the demand of AI. But we've had to make sure that we look at it through a different lens to mitigate the challenge of the consumption of energy to the water usage. And so very much are we looking at zero carbon energy resources like nuclear, as well as zero water cooling for AI. As an example, we're using a cold plate technology for our AI chips, right, to reduce the water usage to cool down AI. So very much are we looking at this from a holistic lens, but also in terms of what we can do within our data centers as we scale, but as well as meeting commitments and doing right for the world and our customers. And hopefully through the company's commitments, through the way that we operate as a business, we hope to not only inspire our customers to take on similar ideas and commitments, but as well as our partners within the industry. And so hopefully that kind of starts to move the needle. And I think it'll just be a very interesting year to come as we start furthering our progress and meeting challenges to our commitments. And an example is the one you gave is the material that we use to make the data centers, from what Miranda was mentioning around low carbon concrete to green steel. And it is not only working with suppliers who can provide those types of material, but it's as well as enabling them and others and the industry to create the demand for that need. And not only that, but then from the services point of view, helping them as customers to understand how can we find this sort of new material, right? For example, we worked with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory to actually design a new battery type that it does not use lithium. And that's using our Azure Quantum Services. We actually have quantum services at Microsoft, and using quantum services and AI technologies to help them find this material, which would have taken decades to actually find with traditional methods.
I think that's so great that we had an opportunity. Next slide, May. That we had an opportunity to hear from all of the panelists and hear the highlights. But Bob, we also had a really exciting exclusive announcement made at GEC's Climate Week event, and I would love to hear a little bit more about this initiative.
Of course. Sure. We had the honor of being the chosen event by the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Electrical Technology Office to announce the launch of their Prime Prize. Tim Sikota, DOE's technical advisor on manufacturing competitiveness, was there to talk about the prize. It incentivizes U.S. solar manufacturing by awarding up to $450,000 per eligible US-based solar PV module or inverter manufacturer. The total prize money is $2.7 million. We at GEC are also proud to share that EPEAT is the only eco-label recommended by the EPA for solar panel products. This means that federal purchasers should look for EPEAT registered products when making decisions on solar purchases. And we're excited to that this Prime Prize creates an incentive for manufacturers to pursue EPEAT and therefore expand the market for U.S. federal government and beyond other types of purchasers of renewable energy to purchase products that are built considering the embedded impacts during their manufacturing phase, as well as all the other material impacts of the products themselves.
Thank you. It really is an exciting announcement, and I'm really glad that we got a chance to share this. And amazingly enough, that brings us to the conclusion of our first webinar in our Climate Week and Beyond series. We want to thank all of you for joining us and hope that you are available for the next 2 upcoming webinars on November 20th and December 3rd. And just as a reminder, by signing up to this webinar today, you're also automatically signed up for the next 2. Bob, I have to say it's really been a pleasure to recap part 1 of GEC's Climate Week event with you. And do you have any final words?
Yeah, there's so much more in this story. I think I'd like to encourage people that are on the phone and others that may be watching this as a recording to continue to attend the webinar series and engage with GEC and our stakeholder community. In half an hour, it's impossible to get to the depth of discussions we had, for instance, on I'll just bring up one, the paradox between the consumption and hunger of data centers from an electricity and water and waste standpoint to produce amazing innovations like AI, but the potential of AI to actually solve those sustainability solutions. And so we had a lot of depth in those discussions. The other paradox we explored was the fact that, compliance around sustainable material topics is, serves both to push industries to make progress, but also can have a cooling effect, right? To move from, an ambitious standpoint where you're going above and beyond, and where regulation might overstep and force organizations back into a defensive posture or a compliance-only posture, and sort of put a dampening effect on industries. And so there's all sorts of paradoxes that we explored. They'll get explored more in webinar 2, and then webinar 3 is a fantastic way to learn more about how our central vehicle, the EPEAT Eco Label, helps drive towards this aspiration for 100% sustainable electronics by creating a market signal to reduce the friction between buyers and sellers looking for sustainable technology. You have to have something that everybody trusts. This next generation EP criteria will certainly get us there, and webinar 3 is a way to learn more about that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you all for attending. Until the next time.
All right, thank you.